Hi. Hi! It's like -3 right now. I don't know what it feels like, but it's certainly warm enough to film outside. And even if it's like almost 5 p.m., it's still light outside. I was actually surprised. So I might as well take advantage of it before winter actually ends. Yeah. So hi, my name is Danny, and this is my February 2015 wrap-up. So, without further ado, let's start with Matilda. Yeah, here you go, Matilda by Roald Dahl. I read this at the beginning of the month. Now, I've seen the movie a couple times when I was younger, so I'm familiar with the story, but I didn't realize just how dark the whole thing was. You see my breath? Yeah, it's really dark, and since I didn't really read Roald Dahl when I was younger, I didn't realize how dark his writing can be. Basically, Matilda is a child who's been ignored and abused by her family, and then when she goes to school, she is exposed to more abuse and bullying by the school principal, who is the biggest bully, I'd say, in the story, Mrs. Trunchbull. And no one but one of her teachers, Miss Honey, was actually paying attention to her, and only Miss Honey then was privy to Matilda's talents and intelligence, and she's really the only one who values her as a person and treats her like one. And honestly, I was expecting to see a lot of images of abuse in this book, but I wasn't expecting it to be treated with such nonchalance. Like, the whole abuse is portrayed, it's so blasé. Like, I know this is dark comedy, so that kind of nonchalance is to induce laughter, but I think as an adult reading it now, it doesn't quite strike me as funny, because this is an important issue that is still going on nowadays, and I can't find it in me to treat this. No, it's a satire, so it's supposed to be funny, and the feeling, as a reader, you're feeling funny about it is supposed to make you feel guilty and supposed to make you think about the state of welfare of different children. But I don't look at this issue like that anymore. So now I'm just wondering, because Matilda is, as I said, is a movie that I've seen before and something that I've loved when I was younger. I'm just left wondering how I'm gonna teach this story to my future child. Yeah, but of course, Miss Honey and Matilda are both really important role models for children, especially little girls. So, I mean, it's not too bad to read this, right? Anyway, speaking of books to tell future children, I also read Little Women by Louisa May Alcott this month. This is actually one of the classics books that I had no interest in reading at all, because I know this is one of the most important Bildungsroman in history, especially for young girls or young women. Well, I mean, this is written in the 19th century, and the ideas of good personhood and good womanhood that this book discusses, they're a little bit outdated, and those ideas of being a good person, I'm not necessarily agreeing with as a modern woman, you know? Of course, this follows a lot of traditional gender roles, and being a good woman is being submissive to your husband and keeping a good home and all that. But we have this character Jo, who is not that kind of girl at all. And I'm not saying that those kinds of girls are bad, but the idea of Jo's character, it's like you're starting to see women breaking the mold. But again, since this was written very early in history, it's not necessarily updated. So yeah, that's why I was hesitant to read this at first, because what else can I glean from this that I can't glean from contemporary coming of age stories? I mean, it's not totally worthless. Of course, this is considered a classic for a reason, and I mean, it's kind of in your face, it's super didactic, and it's not subtle at all in giving its morals and stories, but those stories, those morals of family, of selflessness, of love, of self-confidence and all that, those are things that are timeless. And especially for me, as a woman as a young 20-something who's trying to figure out her life, trying to figure out what to do with her life. I think those are lessons that will always be valuable no matter where or when you receive them. Yeah, Little Women, recommended reading, of course. I read Noggin by John Corey Whaley. So it's about this young boy who was dying of cancer, and he had his head decapitated and frozen cryogenically so that in the future, when technology becomes available, he could have his head transplanted onto another body, and then, you know, he could live again. So yeah. Anyway, 5 years later, after he dies basically, he wakes up in a new body. So technology was successful in reviving him. What happens was, because it's been 5 years, people in his life have already moved on from him, and people, including his then girlfriend, you know, fell in love with someone else, and he, the main character Travis, is actually trying to deal with that, the fact that everyone in his life moved on without him. I didn't like this book very much. The premise is good, and honestly, you know, concept of body and owning your body and biopolitics, all that stuff is really interesting to me, and the book kind of failed to deliver on that. Like, book has so much potential, but instead of, you know, thinking about or giving you this messages about bodies and whose bodies matter in this society of ours, a lot of the plot is pretty much focused on the main character Travis pining over his ex-girlfriend who's not in love with him anymore. That it got me thinking about, you know, the values of being in someone else's body, or being a head, being just a head or just a brain is something that's really interesting. I really wish this book tackled more about that. Yeah. The next book that I read is called What We See When We Read by Peter Mendelsohn. It's a nonfiction book, and Peter Mendelsohn, he's a graphic designer, and he has designed one of the coolest book collections that I've seen. Like this Kafka editions here. They're so pretty, and I think they really, you know, they really capture the themes. This book is about how we as readers see or perceive the images that are described by the author in the book. And he talks about how since we as people have different in real life experiences, we see these things differently, and we model these images in our own environments. Mendelsohn is a graphic designer. This book contains a lot of graphics, and they're really beautiful, and they're really helpful in illustrating Mendelsohn's point. Definitely recommended. And the last book, but definitely not the least, that I read in the month of February is What We Long For by Dion Brand. And it's such a good book. So it follows, well, the story follows for 20-somethings living in Toronto, and it's about how they navigate their individual and cultural expectations from their family and from society as well. So like, this is my demographic, and like their conflicts with their parents, with their friends, with society, and their internal conflicts with themselves. These are stories that I am familiar with, but at the same time I'm also not familiar with these things, and these characters are really complex, and I can't explain the plot. There's not much going on. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things going on, but the writing is mostly focused on their characters' development, and it's very introspective, and it's very rich, and definitely worth a read. Like, I can't explain it to you, but I know that it's good, really good. And I like the fact that Toronto here is almost a character itself. Like, obviously it's a background because it's set in Toronto, and you know how Toronto is mostly this cultural hub of Canada. There's always this idea that Toronto is this mosaic instead of, you know, a melting pot where cultures kind of meld together to form this one great diverse thing, but instead you have this mosaic. You know, it's this mosaic, but instead in this book, at least what I think is, instead of the individual specific tiles in the mosaic to represent Toronto, the city, and Toronto, the people. It's more like Toronto is this grout, like not just Toronto the place, but Toronto as a concept is this grout that kind of fills the space between the tiles in the mosaic. And that, I think that's something that's really highlighted in this book. And I mean, the prose is poetic, and there's a lot of these complex metaphors that I can't even, I mean, I'm still trying to unpack them. Oh my god, such a beautiful book, and definitely recommended. Definitely recommended. Yeah, so that's it for all the books that I read in the month of February 2015, and I'll see you again next month. Or earlier. Thanks for watching. Bye.